Let's take a little look at displacement here. Getting displacements to mix up the way you want takes a little bit of know-how, and that's just Lightwave itself. It's not particularly related to nodal. However, the solutions to the problems do involve nodal, so that's what we're going to take a quick peek at, as well as, of course, talk about one of the other two need-to-knows for when we're using nodal displacements in other ways, for terrains or such. First thing to get is that there are a couple of different ways you can apply displacement through nodal. You have, of course, the main nodal displacement interface, which is this fella here, and this takes a three-dimensional displacement, so points can be displaced in X, Y and Z. If that's what you're wanting to do, then this is the only place that you can do it. Also, if you're only wanting to displace in a single axis, just on the Y or just on the X, for example, it would be in here that you'd want to come. Because all of the other places where you apply displacement, you apply them as a scalar, and polygons are displaced along their own normals. You can also do that in here, of course, by using the spot info and using the different normal outputs to create a vector along which to push a displacement. But anything that you would do like that in here, you can do exactly the same in any of the other displacement editors, which is handy for certain tasks. But here we see the basics. We hook in a vector to the input and bingo, we get a displacement. In this case, this is all I'm doing, a simple displacement, and playing with my order here, which we will be looking at shortly, doesn't actually make any difference whatsoever. What does make a difference to this object is going to be its subdivision order, and that's also something that's going to be of importance to us. With my subdiv order set to last, or basically anything after displacement, then it's always the base cage that gets displaced. And any subdivision smoothing we apply on top is basically just a smoothed version of that displacement. This is good sometimes if you're doing certain things like terrains, where you want to create larger shapes but smooth them out. The other way that you might want to do it, of course, and the way that you'll often do it in the case of things like characters, or perhaps even clothing, is you want fine detail displacement. To do that, you need to subdivide before displacing. And what you wind up with, of course, is far more polygons to actually be playing with there, creating finer detail displacements. And that's great, and for any case where you're just wanting simple displacements on static objects, or even complex displacements on them, then that really is all there is to it. Where folks start to run into problems is with the other occasion where we commonly use displacement, which is on animated deforming meshes, such as characters that we're putting a sculpted ZBrush or similar displacement on. Now, it does depend exactly how we're producing our character or object deformation in such a sense. For instance, if we're just using bones, then we're fine with what we've already got, because we can subdivide after bones, but before displacement, if we're wanting fine detailed displacement, but with nice smooth subdivision over the bone deformation of our low-res cage. And if we want it the other way round, then we can just hit after displacement, and subdivision occurs after the lot. The same, of course, for morphing if we've used morphs. The problem comes when we have things like MDD displacements, such as cloth effects. Notice I'm getting a node match error here. That's because for this and various other ways of applying MDD displacement, you have to be applying it to the correct object, which in this case is the cage. If I go down to subdiv 0, so all I have is the cage, then it all works out just fine there. But if I want to be able to subdivide it, then in this particular case, and in a couple of other cases, I am forced to use the last option. And this is the only way I'm able to get my MDD and subdivide. But, unfortunately, this has caused a problem with my displacement, which we'll notice has vanished. And in this instance, simply changing the order here at which the displacement gets applied does absolutely nothing. I'm not even getting it before subdivision at all. I can't mix my MDD here and the displacement together. It's one or the other. And even if it were not, I still have this whole subdivision thing to consider, because the MDD is a displacement. I can't apply the MDD, then subdivide, then displace. This is easily demonstrated here because the beginning of the fix is to bring my MDD displacement in via the node, letting me lose the cloth effects or whatever else I'd used, and hook it up thus. I can begin to do stuff such as add the two displacements together, but again, This is happening before subdivision, so I'm getting this smoothed version. I can't get the fine detail. And clearly, because they're both happening at the same time, then attempting to change my order of displacement here will make no effect whatsoever. The only effect that would have would be to change my subdivision order here. So of course I can go to after displacement, and depending upon which of these has been chosen as the displacement order, it'll either correctly work or it won't. So as long as I displace at the right point, which is the local, which is really what this refers to, after local displacement, then it all lines up. But I am stuck with this problem. And the solution to this is to use the other displacement options. So, for instance, I'm going to hook over at just the MDD here, copy out our crumple, and then go into the surface editor nodes for the object itself. Here we see, of course, I've plugged into this displacement input, which we have on our surface destination node, and that is the input for the enable bump option here in displacement. That hooked up, I can turn this on, set a distance in here, and there it goes. It is, of course, this multiplied by the distance, so I could either, bring the alpha down, but it's just as easy to bring it down here, let's say to 20 millimeters. And we can see that I have this same effect where the displacement is being applied before the subdivision, but we remember, of course, that this is the local displacement, so if I apply that before world, which is after local, then I can get my fine detail as well. Obviously, changing this here to last would ruin that, but otherwise everything is correct. As I mentioned before, because this is a scalar input, you're always displacing along the normal, and there's no way to change that. So things like displacements from vector normal maps and the like are presently no good in here. And no, hooking bump to bump does not give you a 3D displacement that will come through via here. Whatever is hooked into bump is just the rendered bump. It won't drive displacement in any way. That is what the displacement input is for. But it is also helpful in that we can save displacements as just a part of the object surface itself, rather than having them set up on a scene-by-scene basis. And there we have it. Those are the ways around the displacement editors and orders, and how you hook up the nodes and use them with the other parts of your mesh properties to get the correct outcome that you're after.